Adaptation Community facilitator at the Global Center on Adaptation. The Water Adaptation Community supports the Global Center on Adaptation by bringing together practitioners and experts to accelerate adaptation. And floating development is one way of adapting to sea level rise and flooding. And it's also a way to expand the urban space. This webinar is the first time that this group of entrepreneurs and creative thinkers has come together as a community of practice. And I wanted to first introduce the speakers. So if you can please turn on your camera. So thank you. And panelists. Arnold Molenaar will introduce the session. He is lead cities at the Global Center on Adaptation and Chief Resilience Officer of the City of Rotterdam. And Vicky Lin will provide the bigger picture. She is project coordinator at Blue 21 and was chair of the organizing committee of the Second World Conference on Floating Solutions. Dr. Nandan Mukherjee is a postdoc and knowledge exchange specialist from the School of Social Sciences at the University of Dundee, the UK. Nandan and his team has received several recognitions for the work on flood resilient homes in Bangladesh, for example, the UN Risk Award. Peter van Wijngaarden is CEO of a floating farm in Rotterdam, and he will guide us through it and explain all the steps in the circular process of bringing food to the city. Jan Willem Roel is owner of FlexSpace in the Netherlands and co-founder of FlexSpace International in Singapore. He will talk about the floating pavilion, a building that inspires. And finally, we'll listen to Dr. Rutger de Graaf van Dinter, chairman and founder of Blue Revolution Foundation, and he will be presenting the idea for a training module on floating development. Then we will have all these are pre-recorded presentations, but then we will have a live discussion. And then we will be joined by Sarah Okorno from Accra. And she has been a young leader with the water and urban team of the Global Center on Adaptation. And she has insights of flood-prone communities in the city and how they deal with floods. And Jeroen van Dijk will also join us. He has done his bachelor's thesis on why floating projects in the Netherlands fail or succeed for Blue 21. And we will also have Jelle Vedder. He is a floating development entrepreneur and owner of Bartos and Vedder. So I think we will begin, and your questions are very welcome in the Q&A sections, but let's begin the webinar, the presentations. Sorry, I don't think that the sound is working here. There is a technical problem. We're trying to solve it. Apologies.
discussing with Rutger de Graaf, one of the keynote speakers in this webinar, about possibilities how to create this floating pavilion in the Rijnhaven of the city. And by that time, we strongly believed that floating development was one of the answers towards the climate change. And at that time, I was leading the Rotterdam Climate Proof program, and we saw this as an important movement, but still being a niche, you could say. But now, as Chief Resilience Officer of the City of Rotterdam and lead cities at the Global Center, I'm even more convinced that floating development is becoming more and more crucial as one of the answers to climate change. And it's important to be to include this in programs focusing on adaptation. And I'm really happy to see that after the floating pavilion, we have seen more initiatives in our city, like the floating farm and houses, etc. But now I think it's time to scale and to accelerate. Especially when you look at the latest report of the IPCC, it's well, for us as professionals, I think it's not everything is not new in this report, but again, it's creating the awareness about the urgency. And I think the momentum now is there. Headquarters of the Global Center is in Rotterdam, and I'm really looking forward to that. And I would advise the community to join forces and to find out together, facilitated and supported by the Global Center, how we can scale and accelerate the movement and the possibilities of floating development in the world. Not only for Rotterdam, of course, but especially for the coastal cities and the delta cities in the Global South. So I'm really looking forward to the content of the presentations in this webinar and looking forward to the discussion. Thanks.
Welcome, I'm Vicky from Blue 21. Today I'm going to present to you on the topic of what is the need for floating development, showing you some examples from around the world. First of all, what is floating development? Floating development usually consists of a superstructure that has a function of, for instance, housing or for recreational purposes, for energy or food production. And it has also a substructure or floater that's made of steel, concrete, or other materials. It is usually fixed at the bottom of a water body so that it doesn't drift away, but also has the freedom to adapt and move according to changing water levels. Not to be confused with stilted houses or amphibious houses. So if we look at the critical global challenges for 2050, we can see that more cities still need to be built while facing the projected sea level rise of up to 30 centimeters. This is also confirmed by the newest IPCC AR6 report. And the fact is that 50% of the global population is living within 100 kilometers of the coast, posing a huge threat to the coastal community. How are we going to do this? And at the same time, if we continue to, for instance, produce and harvest food the way we do, by 2050, we would have a shortage of land of the size of North America in order to feed 10 billions. Where are we going to find the space? Most cities resort to the more conventional way of creating space, which is land reclamation. But the reality is that we are running out of sand. There's an alternative solution, which is to create a new space underwater. In fact, a lot of solutions are already available for different applications, and it is possible to create a closed loop and a circular urban metabolism with a floating development. I'll show you some building blocks and some examples from around the world. Most people are now probably familiar with floating solar, not only for inland applications, but also for offshore. different designs have been explored, as well as for offshore floating wind, floating aquaculture at very large scale. A city can actually redevelop and expand its port areas using floating structures, also create public or event space on floating structures, more recreations, and also to create affordable housing. This is an example in the Philippines, taking into account vernacular architecture. But with only one single floating house, we cannot make enough impact. We must create at a community, neighborhood, and even city scale. In Amsterdam, you could also see already bigger scale of a sustainable floating neighborhood. In fact, floating community or living on water is nothing new. It can be observed in the past and at the present with different technologies implemented. There are also some experts looking further into the future, creating floating development at a city scale, including us. This is one of our recent projects where we work together with our partners, Shimizu Corporation and Finance Bay Area Development, where we plan to introduce large floating settlements in the Baltic Sea around the tunnel initiative. On the left, you could see some mega float city created by Shimizu called Green Float, where they would introduce large floating structures for housing, for recreation, as well as food and energy production. Such a design has already been tested in numerous basin tests, as well as numerical computations. And it's proved that it is technically feasible and even safe, which is often the concern of a lot of people when it comes to living on such large scale floating structure. In conclusion, floating development is climate proof and future proof. It can adapt to any future sea level rise, providing protection for the coast against the flooding. It can also be safer than land in face of climate change and other natural disasters such as typhoons or earthquakes. It can provide exceptional safety level, and it can be engineered to survive, for instance, 1 in 10,000 year storms. But not only adaptation, floating cities could also contribute to climate change mitigation, reducing greenhouse gas emissions while achieving numerous UN Sustainable Development Goals. Last but not least, a little about us. We are Blue 21. We are a multidisciplinary team of maritime urbanists who are also pragmatic visionaries with 14 years of experience and knowledge on design and engineering of large-scale floating cities. We value collaboration highly, and we focus a lot also on creating impact. Last October, together with other partners, we successfully organized Paving the Waves, the second World Conference on Floating Solutions, where we successfully brought together stakeholders from both public and private sectors to come together to discuss and also to share their state-of-the-art findings on different types of floating solutions. To know more about the conference, please visit the website shown here. Our mission is to provide resilient and circular living spaces for billions. And our vision is that we have to take step-by-step approach to start first near shore and eventually further offshore into creating large-scale self-sufficient floating cities. Only when we do this at a large scale can we really tackle the critical challenges to create a more sustainable and better future for all. If you're interested in knowing more, please visit our website and get in touch. Thank you very much.
Hello, I'm Nandan Mukherjee, and as a part of University of Dundee in the United Kingdom, and by collaborating with the Center for Climate Change and Environmental Research, hosted at Brack University in Bangladesh, we first ever attempt building a flood resilient home. And I'm repeating that it's not a floating home. It's the flood resilient home is what it is. The reason why the resilience issues is coming up because vulnerability comes from multiple dimensions, mostly from access to basic lifeline services regarding food, water, energy, and other issues. So it was very tough for people living in Bangladesh to understand what does freshwater means. Because when you are on a queue of 500 families waiting for drinking water during flood time, it's hard. And due to climate change and sea level rise and salinity intrusion, it causes symptoms of health hazards, including eclampsia or cervical cancers to women. So these flood resilient homes address all these issues, including it provides income, it provides food, it provides livelihood options. So I will go for a brief photo story first so that we can get yourself familiarized with the concept. Then I'll explain it a bit more. So I hope you have seen the video and you have many questions in your mind, how it works and how did you do that. So the home floats uninterruptedly during flood with a buoyant platform of 40,000 kilograms or 40 tons in weight. The home would also stand a category 3 windstorm. In local terms, we call it cyclone or tornado. Therefore, it is resilient to coastal and inland storms. It would also stand earthquake of category 8, measurable in the Richter scale out of 10. The home would produce adequate food for a family by maintaining appropriate dietary balance and nutritional security. Carbohydrates was sourced from 4,000 vegetable plants cultivated inside the premise and mostly utilizing the outer walls of the house. Protein demand was made by 216 chicken birds and 2,000 fishes cultivated in the hydroponic and aquaponic system in the premise. Freshwater was sourced from the sustainable rainwater source. A total of 17,000 liters of fresh drinkable water would be stored in each home to support more than 150 days of the consecutive dry period for a 6-member family. The quantity of water was measured by an innovative double filtration approach developed by the team. A wind turbine coupled ram pump technology was invented and tested to apply to lift the water to an overhead water system. Therefore, the water available in all the taps were of drinking water standard. The house was fully supplied by renewable electricity sources. A 15,100 watt solar PV panel backed by an innovative technology of solar concentrator, wind turbine, and biogas generated electricity option was also the first of its kind in Bangladesh and other similar countries. Sustainable livelihood position was one of the key features of the home. The home is able to generate a standardized income for a family of 6 members, not only during flood, but also during the dry periods or all around the year from poultry, fish, and vegetable production. The annual income for a family was estimated at $4,500 per capita GDP of Bangladesh. So in the poster, background poster, you can see that the home design was, it is a 3D of the flood resilient home that we built in Bangladesh. It is 100% built on bamboo, and only the environmental footprint during construction and design and operation and maintenance was based on the principle of net zero. The reason why we call it a dream home, not a flood resilient home, is because that's the name the community preferred. It was a very much community driven initiative. We empowered 15 very vulnerable families to join in the process of co-design and co-production. And then they came up with this design of flood resilient home. What we did, we used computer softwares and designers to make it presentable the rest of the community. The major lesson learned from this process was, it was, as I said, it was a technically sound initiative, and it the acid test was done because it survived 2 consecutive mega flood season. But what happened after 2 years, when people have realized that they are getting, some poor people are getting benefit out of that, then some serious theft incidents were reported from the construction site, despite all the materials were stored securely in 2 separate construction sheds. We made some police reporting and involved the government administration, but finally, and we also employed 5 security guards at the site. But the communities were confused because this is an agriculture-based production system. Benefit doesn't realize fully even after first year of operation. So estimated loss from theft and new employment was estimated as $2,500, which was also unanticipated from our side. We ran out of budget, and that created a problem. So for each of the house, we spent around $20,000 finally to build it. But based on those experiences, we decided that this community-driven initiative, the learning is much more important than the building itself. So we thought that we are going to keep that learning with the community, and we decided to build a community hub or a school in the coastal region of Bangladesh with improved design and based on the learning we had during the construction of flood resilient home.
Welcome back. Here you see our building completely floating in the port of Rotterdam. You see our solar panels. We collect rainwater that we filter. It goes back as drinking water to our cows. And it's the first one in the world, as I already mentioned. Now let's start with our goals, our objectives. For us, it's really important to produce healthy food close to consumers. And consumers live inside cities. So where can you find space in the city? Where can you be climate adaptive in the city? Obviously on the water. So here in the port of Rotterdam, we have a tide of 2 meters. So every day we go up and down with 2 meters. And there we can simulate what happens if sea level is rising or more rainfall is coming. So this is our stable. It's a fully automated stable where we collect all the waste streams and we give it to the cows. You can see over here. They upgrade it again back into protein that goes back to the city. Now, as we know, a cow does not give only milk, but it also gives manure. So what do we do with the manure? Because manure is a very important, interesting organic fertilizer for the city. So let's go and see downstairs what we do with the manure. Our stable we have a manure robot. Collects the manure in the urine and brings it to this machine. And there we turn it into all kind of healthy fertilizer that goes back to parks and city plants in the city. For us, a very important part is also the sustainability and the circularity of our farm. We want to be a circular part of new cities. So for instance, we collect all kinds of waste streams, bread, grass from sports stadium, orange peels, all kinds of waste streams, organic waste streams from the city that we collect that goes to our cows, and our cows turn it into protein again that goes back into the city. So here we are at our dairy processing room. Every day we make fresh dairy, like milk, like yogurt, like buttermilk, butter, and obviously also cheese. So our cheeses are going back, like the rest of the dairy, to the city, and that makes the circle completely complete. So welcome in our store. Here you see all our products that we make every day, completely fresh and pure. So we have our great milk. We have very hip products from the city, milk with kombucha. We have our buttermilks. We have our yogurts, and obviously we have our own cheeses. Here you see our cheeses. So many thanks for watching, and I welcome you to the floating farm. Thank you very much.
My name is Jan-Willem Roel. I'm the founder and CEO of FlexBase in the Netherlands. I'd like to present to you the floating pavilion that has been founded about 10 years ago as a center of, let's say, adaptation into the city of Rotterdam. First, I'd like to present a little bit about FlexBase. It was founded about 10 years ago. At this moment, we built about 6,000 square meters of floating, and we are at this moment establishing an, let's say, a company in Singapore that's called FlexBase International. The floating concept is a patented one and has to deal with EPS and concrete. What is very nice about the system, it is hardly no maintenance, it is very long lasting, and it is fully recyclable. But also regarding the cost, it is costing less than a concrete or steel barge at that size. I can show you some of the projects that we've done, a greenhouse in Holland, an office in Amsterdam. We also did a floating house project in Manila. We did an amphibious floating house project in Dhaka. And last but not least, the floating lounge in Bahrain. To tell you a little bit about the floating pavilion as a start, the client is the municipality of Rotterdam to show what we should do around climate change. And we had some really requirements. It should be climate proof, minimize the CO2 footprint. We already had in the beginning that it should be domes that's been put on top of it. It would be two structures, the pavilion and the square, totally of about 1,400 square meters. We had to put basements into it and a very short construction time because of the Tour de France that we started in Rotterdam. So to take you a little bit on the design starting points, it should be soap bubbles on the water, and there should be no more facilities inside. So we looked into how to build it very light, because that has to do with the water. Everything you put in on top of it, you have to get buoyancy again. So we work with a steel sphere. We first started with glass into the steel, but that was far too heavy. So we ended up with ETF E4, which has already been used at the swimming pool in Beijing, for instance. We looked in very much into the energy efficiency with microclimates into the building. We had a very innovative heating concept that's coming from the greenhouses in Holland. The cooling concept was also rather new, with extracting water from the air. We had a heat recovering system with salts that were getting fluid in the day and giving out the heat in the night. And of course, the very efficient natural ventilation, getting the water over the air from the water surface into the building and get the warm out. Then finally, we did a lot on wastewater and fresh water. We had an individual wastewater system in one of the cellars, and we used that water that was cleaned as toilet water again, flush water. The innovative design for us as the float was that it was round. And that was very special. Then we had to bring in the compartments for the cellars, as you see in the middle picture. But also we built it in another location than it was finally being put. Regarding engineering, we had a lot of issues regarding how to engineer, to what codes. We had to deal with stability and tilting, buoyancy, of course. Then also, because we're building on water, we have to look into the manufacturing process, because a lot of loads are getting onto the structure while putting, for instance, the concrete. We had to deal with the waves and the water current, because we have a tide difference about 3 and 3.5 meters at that location. We had some marine requirements, of course. One of them is the bridges, because we needed 2 bridges regarding safety requirements. And a very special feature regarding MEP piping that were all into the floating constructions. We had to get very special connections, because we could not moor the floating pavilion with poles. So we had to develop something else. We had very uneven loads, because inside the spheres we had a conference room. We had to deal with trim facilities regarding the flexibility of the total structure. And also we needed all the point loads to be taken from the spheres. So to take you a little bit through the building process of the float, you see here, we started on the water with the plates, and later on also with blocks. The total thickness of the EPS was about 2 meters, 2.1 meter. And then we put some concrete beams into it, as you see in the most top right picture. And finally, we put also the side slabs to protect the EPS from collision. The floor is about 20 centimeters. On top of it, it was built the steel structure for the domes, and then it was covered with ETFE foil. That was all done at the building location, and then after that, it was brought to the location where it was finally definitive. It was on the Rijnhaven in Rotterdam. Really, Rotterdam wanted to expose itself as the city that was dealing with climate change. They wanted to show that we could really build something that can be adapted to the water level rise. A lot of new ideas and inventions were presented in these domes. Living with water is really, really better than fighting the water. So really, if you want to get more information about this kind of structures, what is possible, then please contact me with my email address, and maybe you can have a look at my website. Thank you very much, and good day.
Good afternoon. My name is Rutger de Graaf van Dinter. I will be talking about the proposal for international training module on floating development. A little bit of introduction about myself. My mission is to enable climate-proof floating development with a positive social and ecological impact. I've been working on this for the past 15 years in different roles, as chairman and co-founder of the Blue Revolution Foundation, but also as director, co-founder of different companies involved in floating projects. I'm also the co-initiator of the Floating Pavilion Rotterdam, a project very interesting, of which we heard already a lot today. I was involved in the Second World Conference of Floating Solutions as keynote speaker and co-chair. I'm also the editor of the book Climate Resilient Urban Areas, published by Paul Craig Macmillan. And one of the chapters, the 5 pillars of climate resilience, I wrote together with Henk Ovink, the national envoy on water management of the Kingdom of the Netherlands. And I'm also co-initiator of the National Research Initiative Floating Future, together with the Maritime Research Institute, the Netherlands. So it's not surprising to you that I'm very interested in floating urban development. So why have we proposed an international training module on floating developments? We have noticed that floating developments can have global potential to contribute to climate-proof living space and support urgent urban transformation to resilience. However, we also see that current projects are still quite small and require skill. If you compare them to the scale of the climate threat of our cities, this required skill is still lacking. So we think that awareness and knowledge about floating developments need to be strengthened globally to enable wider application of this technology. As also shown in previous presentations today, the building blocks and technology is there, but we need to increase the scale of these applications. One way to look at this is the framework of receptivity. Receptivity is a theoretical scientific framework that I also used in my PhD. And it's about the extent to which there not only exists a willingness, but also an ability among stakeholders to absorb, accept, and utilize innovation options. And there are four components or attributes of this receptivity framework: awareness, association, acquisition, and application. Awareness is really about the stakeholder sense of urgency, and also that the status quo is no longer sufficient and that there are alternative options. Association is the ability of stakeholders to link floating developments to their own agenda, objectives, and interests. Acquisition is the ability of stakeholders to plan, design, engineer, implement, but also operate and maintain floating developments. And application is the ability to have sufficient legal and financial incentives to really apply these innovation options, floating options in practice. So all of these four components need to be in place really to support behavioral change and implementation of floating urban development. There are already capacity building initiatives going on. Today, our webinar really aims to contribute to strengthening awareness. Also, innovative pilot projects such as the floating pavilion have that purpose. On the association level, for instance, on the international policy level, we have noticed the UN high-level roundtable on floating cities, which took place 2 years ago. More locally, we have started the think tank Governance of Floating Cities. A research programs such as Space at Sea and also the National Research Initiative Floating Future aim to strengthen the capacity and knowledge of stakeholders. Also conferences such as Paving the Waves have that objective. And the Thousands Adapt Now program, global programs really aim at increasing also the application of these kind of adaptation options. And with our international training module, we also aim to have a contribution to this objective. So these are some of the initiatives already in place to strengthen the receptivity of stakeholders for floating urban development. I want to stress that there's a need for an interdisciplinary approach. It's not only about technology, but the social impact, ecological impact is just as important, as well as not only talking about science and research, but also about application and practice. So we really need an action research approach where we study and implement at the same time, because we don't have time to study forever if we consider the urgency of climate adaptation challenges in cities worldwide. So this is our draft structure of our training module. Lectures will be given by the leading experts from the World Conference on Floating Solution 2020. And the themes include socio-economic aspects and governance, design and technology, and ecology and water quality. So that's the lectures part. And we also have interactive workshops, governance and planning, organized by me. Technology of floating and amphibious structures, organized by Jelle Vedder and Jan-Willem Roel, and food and energy by Peter van Wingerde and Vicky Lin. The objective is to increase awareness and knowledge of floating urban development as an option, not the option, but an option, to increase climate resilience among city policymakers, professionals, and planners, and to do this globally. Also to strengthen the international knowledge network for climate resilient floating developments. The platform will most likely be digital. The duration will be 1 day, and we're looking at a group size of about 15 to 30 people. Expression of interest, if you want to join this international training module that we want to organize, you can respond to the follow-up communication after this webinar. You will receive information about the slides and about this webinar, and that will also include the possibility to express your interest. And if the group site is big enough, we will start discussing and further shaping this course together with the Global Center of Adaptation. I encourage you to look into more information about the topics of floating urban development. For instance, The presentations of the Second World Conference on Floating Solutions are available open source, very interesting. Also, open source knowledge base on floating development by Blue21, and the Space at Sea Horizon 2020 research program on large-scale multi-use floating platforms commissioned by the European Union. Also very interesting and open source deliverables that you can download and have a look at. With that, I would like to end my presentation. Thank you very much for your attention. I welcome questions in the discussion. And you can also reach out to me directly by the email address that you see on the screen now or through the website. Thank you very much.
Now, let me see here. I wanted to welcome you all back to the discussion. Let me see here. And I welcome all the panelists back into view and to put on your videos, please. And you, the audience, you are welcome to have questions and comments. And please place them in the Q&A box. And Arnold Molenaar, going back to the title of the webinar, how can floating development help adaptation to climate change? This is clearly a solution for both high-income and low-income settings. From my perspective, from a water adaptation community perspective, I'm interested in understanding how a community practice like this on floating development can support flood-vulnerable countries and communities, and how to develop this community of practice further. And what is your most burning questions to discuss with the panelists? It's over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Åsa. And can you hear me clear?
Yeah.
Okay, good. So yes, I think let's park your question for a while and come back to that at the end of the seminar. We only have, I think, 15 minutes, and that's always too short. So to have a community online, it is already, I think, a good solution, because we have to continue this conversation, I think. And I think what I would put on the table, and I will first start with the newcomers in the panel, is taking into account that floating development is one of the solutions to climate adaptation, but also seeing that it is still more or less in a niche. How can we accelerate this, and how can we scale this to more cities and countries that really are facing the challenges of flooding and sea level rise? And actually, I would like to go to Sarah, if that is possible. Ladies first. And she is actually, as I understand right now, in Accra. Sarah, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, great, Sarah. So could you give me your perspective on what are the needs in Accra, and having listened to the presentations, what do you think is needed to get this higher on the agenda and to apply these solutions in your city?
Yes, thank you so much. I think this is a very good idea, but then one major challenge to this is the fact that, awareness on floating homes here is very poor. Like, people generally do not know about floating homes being a means to, build resilience against floods. And then for here in Accra, what we normally do is to, undertake these temporal solutions that end up, coming back to us in the face. Maybe dredging the gutters, the waterways, building gutters, trying to elevate homes. But we keep on doing this year after year, but then we have the same problems, even more. The floods are becoming more. So I think it is time for a city like Accra and then other developing countries to even look at, this floating development as a key option. So we have to find ways and means to deal with the awareness. I think that is why the community of practice and then other practices are there. So we have to look for a way to, deal with the awareness, because if you look at even the whole policy set, we need policy reforms. Because people are not really allowed to build on, water systems. It's something that is hard to do here. So we need policy, reformations, and then, we need people to understand the essence of, floating homes, because for here, like this, people might think, it's not safe. I cannot really be in a floating house and then sleep comfortably, because anything at all can happen. But all of this is something that through education, through training, people can come to, the realization of the essence of this floating homes. I can't, I don't even know if there are any technical, organizations or companies here in Ghana who are into building, this kind of floating homes. It's all, when we go back to our educational institutes, maybe those who are reading architecture or the engineers and all, like, is it even part of the curriculum? I don't think so. So we really have to start from somewhere. And I wanted to also ask about, a country like Netherlands, like where you guys started from, because I'm not sure you just started, building like that. You started from somewhere. You started doing some background work, maybe talking to leaders, trying to do some background, lay the foundation for this sort of development before, what we are actually seeing now. So maybe some of the steps you put in place, we can buy into them and then, try to do something here. So
thank you, Sarah. Yeah, I think that's a good idea also to really harvest the lessons learned, also about the beginning of the processes and decisions into the adaptation community. I also think the training course that has been developed by some of the speakers here, and what Rutger was mentioning, maybe a training course can also be of interest for politicians or city planners in Accra. Thank you, Sarah. I want to go to Jeroen. We haven't heard from Jeroen so far. Jeroen, can you give your perspective on your thoughts about what is needed to take the floating concept to a higher level?
Yeah, well, just for the Dutch situation, I think it's important for to develop some national legislation on developing floating houses, because right now there is, once there is some development, it's because of some local politician that's very enthusiastic. But there are some challenges when you want to build bigger floating houses or multiple houses on a platform. So that should be done by national policies. I think there is a lot to win there.
And does that only count for the Netherlands? I suppose you think it's also relevant for other countries in the world?
I think it's relevant for all the countries, but in the Netherlands, we have a lot of legislation on everything. And that means that right now it's virtually impossible to do some things because of that legislation. So that needs to be changed.
Okay, thanks. Well, that's again, actually, you could say a new chapter to this discussion, how to develop enough legislation to get things done. Thanks, Jeroen. Jelle, can I switch to you about your perspective on what you have heard so far, and what are your thoughts about scaling and accelerating?
Most of the time we are occupied with the technical side of things. So people come with questions how to build such a project. Legislation. For example, when we went to Bahrain to build or to develop 500 to 1,000 floating villas, still in development, still a question there. It's all political there at the moment. They ask about the legislation, how to treat, for example, these buildings offshore, inshore. So they were pointing to each other, who was responsible for the regulations and the legislation there. what we did notice there, when we're there, is that they accept the legislation that they have in the Netherlands. The Netherlands is at the moment the most enhanced country regarding legislation for building on water. We have the building code for building on water implemented in, I think it was 2018. Before that was the NTA in 2011. Which gave the guidelines for building on water. After that, it became part of the building code in the Netherlands, which we apply at the moment for stability and other legislation or regulation regarding building on water. Implementing also the Euro code, the technical regulation for building on water, with the exceptions, for example, like you can use the old building code, etc., etc. And that helped us, but it also helped local governments abroad, because if we can share the legislation that we have here, they already have like a starting point for implementing the legislation there. For example, Dubai is a state that uses legislation from other countries when they don't really have it. For example, the railroads, they use the Italian regulations for their railroads. So, yeah, that is what we experience here. And then, of course, you have for projects like communities on a bigger platform, islands, there is already some legislation available. Some is used in, for example, the houses built in the north of Amsterdam, where they have like one hull and 2 households on top. So you see some inventive ways to create multiple houses on one platform, like own ownership of the platform for maintenance, etc., etc. So, yeah, you see there, you can use the Dutch regulations actually abroad when they accept it, and they are open for these legislations actually.
Okay, yeah, okay, thanks, Jelle. I think crucial information also to somehow find a way to add this to the community online. So that we not only focus on the technical part and about the process to create awareness, but also the legislation and the regulation stuff. Thanks.
These are the things that we will also want to put online at the Water Adaptation Community web pages. So we want to actually, that's a really good information.
Yeah. So also how to proceed, because we have 6 minutes, and I wanted to give the keynote speakers the possibility to give their own final remarks and say something about how they see the water adaptation community and as a possibility to move this forward. Is that okay to do a very short, brief last round, and then maybe if time is there, go to the Q&A of the audience?
Absolutely. And what we are interested in really is to how can we benefit really the vulnerable regions, the flood exposed regions and countries, and how to then be innovative in the way that we broker and connect people in this community practice. Okay. So sure, we can go a little bit over time. I hope that's okay with the participants.
Let's see. Peter, can I give you the floor about what are your thoughts about using and developing the water adaptation community, but also taking into mind that the biggest challenges are in the Global South?
Thank you so much. I think it's a great initiative. Let's start with that. I think it's obvious that we need to change in the world. We see the climate change, so we need to do something. And from our perspective, we started, and this was also an interesting question from Sarah or remark, what is your drive to start something? So we started to produce healthy food because this is one of the most life essential elements that we all need. So can we make sure that we have energy or water or data or food, in our case, secured? So this is also about the awareness. So we made something that is sexy, it's attractive, it is essential to live on this planet, to have healthy food. Everybody on the planet is entitled to have healthy food. So you need to look into situations in countries and cities, how you can assure the healthy food close to the consumers who are there. And well, our example is on the water, and I think we can help many countries and many cities to produce healthy food. So for us, great initiative on this global adaptation. So we're part of it, and we're welcoming everybody with the question on any topic on food related issues.
Thank you, Peter. Yeah, so food as entry point, you could say, or healthy food as entry point for also floating development. That's a crucial one, interesting one. I want to also switch to Nandan, if I'm pronouncing it well. What I also got from your presentation, Nandan, is you said somewhere seeing is also believing. I think we need an adaptation community. I think we need a training course. That's also a helpful way to get this accelerated. But we also need examples that people can see and visit. Nandan, can you give your perspective on this? How can we accelerate floating development?
Yeah, I'll be brief. So examples today, but when people are suffering,
your sound is not that well at the moment.
Can you come closer to the microphone, maybe?
Hello.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, great. Yeah.
Okay, just so my point is we have seen lots of examples today, and there are other examples in the world, but at the same time the technology and the process of designing floating structures are still in infancy. That's why seeing is believing, and we need to make it more robust, more accessible to the rest of the community. That's why we have stopped, we have just paused for a few, while, so that we can disseminate the information, the lesson learned to a wider community through education. So our next phase, what we are doing right now is building a school so that we can encourage children living on that premise and live with that technology, so that they can apply those technological interventions as well as the process itself, what Peter said regarding safe food generation or renewable energy options in their own life and through education. So first we have to build something so that people can see that. Next is educate people so that they can apply that principle in their life. So
great. Yeah, thank you, Nandan. And I really would like to challenge you to share your lessons learned and put that on the community, on the platforms, because it will be very helpful for a lot of people, I think. Yeah, thank you. Jan Willem, how about your perspective on using the water adaptation community to accelerate, to scale?
What I see as a very good starting point is that we are joining forces. That is one of the major things, I think, is that we have a lot of, let's say, knowledge, we have a lot of experience, and we can join it all up to make it happen. I think that is one of the major things that we are going for. One thing I'm really a little bit afraid for is the social aspect. We have not touched that yet. If I see all my projects that I've done, for instance, in Asia, it is the people who don't want to live on water because they say living on water is for the poor people. It is not for the people who have money. Like here in Holland, it is very nice to live in the water, and they want to spend money on it to live, really have a floating villa. The social aspect in Asia is totally different. And so that is also one of the aspects that we have really to confront the people with also with the governments and so on. And another thing is I've noticed when I was building the projects in Bangladesh, is that the governments are not really interested. They're just, okay, if you want to do a project, please go ahead, no problem. But we didn't get the government with us. We have tried everything. I've been to, I think, most of the ministries I've been to talking about the project. It is nice. They all say, yes, 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 but they do nothing.
Thanks. Point taken, Jan Willem. I think this could be an interesting topic for another follow-up webinar. So
Yes.
the whole social aspect, the cultural differences, how to convince communities and politicians of the need and the possibilities and opportunities of floating development.
Yes, I agree.
I want to move because we are far out of time. Vicky, can you give your perspective? And then I think Rutger is the last speaker in the row I would like to go to.
Yes.
But first.
Thank you, Arnoud. And thank you for organizing this webinar. Thanks to Global Center on Adaptation. I think it's all very interesting information and cases we've learned today. And it's very nice to see so many participants interested in floating solutions. And it's also a wonderful platform that for the water adaptation community as a neutral platform where we could share knowledge and more information about different types of floating solutions. So yeah, I'm really excited and really looking forward to exchange knowledge on the platform in the future, and to get in touch with more participants that are present now. I also see the founder of Bluet, Titi, and also from Finch Floating Home, Peter Ham, are also here. So it's good to see that the community of practice is actually there. So nice to have the platform to share knowledge. And thanks again for having us as a panelist for today.
Thank you. Thank you for your final remarks, Vicky. And I think, well, the challenge, of course, is to get this community growing the coming weeks and months and years. So can I go to you, Rutger, for your final words, and specifically maybe also something about the training course. Where can people find this, and how do you? Well, what are the target groups you want to focus on?
Yes, thank you very much, Arnoud. I think also, yeah, as the other speakers, I think it's a great initiative, this community of practice. And I think the main thing I'm concerned with is scaling up. To do innovative projects like the Floating Pavilion and other projects that we have seen, it often takes political leadership. Well, it's already great if that's there, because then you can do pilots, you can strengthen awareness. But we also want to scale up. 3 billion people moving to Delta cities. So how can we substantially provide a solution to that size of problem and getting floating out of the niche sphere? And I think it's happening. So mainstreaming is happening. And the fact that the Global Center on Adaptation is talking about it, you guys are opening a floating office even next Monday, and the UN is talking about it. So mainstreaming is happening. And also, if you look at the people here, so I think the group you see here in this panel, they're all world leaders in their knowledge field. But we also all work on relatively small organizations, including myself. So I think that it becomes more interesting for governments as well to get it into their urban plans, in their policy plans, of also larger developers, larger investors, institutional investors, larger construction companies are also getting involved, because then you will see that also it's a different story if a big construction company approaches a city than if I do that as a small, even though I have 15 years of experience in this, I did a lot of projects, but still we're all working at small companies. So you see it happening now that also larger private entities are getting involved. And a good example is the Shimizu Corporation. We work with them already for years. They are a top 20 contractor in the world. So of course, it's a different story if such an organization is going to work on floating than if relatively small companies from the Netherlands do it. So I think the course should also contribute in involving larger investors, larger developers, larger construction companies, also to strengthen our story and also to scale up the knowledge of this tremendous group that we have here and really work together to be able to make this scale so that we can really say, okay, we want to provide a floating living space for billions of people in the course of this century, because that's the size of the challenge we're talking about. And I think, of course, the course that we're developing is a small step, but an important step to, I think, achieve that objective.
Okay, Rutger, great for your final words, and I think I'm really hopeful that the course will be the beginning of this scaling. Also, we are already over time, and so I'm over to you, and not sure if there is any time to go to the Q&A of the audience.
I have been looking at the questions, and they have been answered, I think, by the speakers. I see very much. So I don't see just directly any lots of nice comments there. So we will keep that and ideas and really nice ideas that we will put online on the new WOC web pages that will be updated very shortly. We will be able to put up information there that can support implementation, and we will send up a follow-up email to the participants of this webinar. So I just wanted to close there because we are late, and I hope that this has been as inspiring to you as for me, and hope to see you online and in real life in the future in this community. Thank you very much.
You're welcome, and thanks for organizing also.
Thank you to all of you, and thank you to the participants.
My pleasure. Have a nice day, everybody. Bye-bye. Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.